probably agree on.
Yeah, the playoff team for sure.
So do you.
I mean, I tell you what, I don't think there was a more accurate state. And
if they struggle again, I mean, I don't think there's any way you can keep Alex Grinch, but.
What's going on, y'all? Bud Elliott back again here for another episode of Summer School. That's our college football preview series here on the Cover 3 podcast today. It's USC. There's only one spot to go for USC coverage, in my opinion. That's USC football. My man, Ryan Abraham, runs it. What's going on, dude?
Bud, good to see you. Good to hear the summer schools are back. I'm in the intro talking about Alex Grinch, which is kind of funny, but thanks for having me on again. It's always great.
Man, we had some guys just nail it last year. Fetters at Washington's like, it's not that hard to see him in the playoff. And, Sam at Michigan's just like, oh, look, I think they're actually fine at corner. Watch this guy. And he was like a top 100 draft pick. So big shoes to fill, of course. And we know that you will deliver. A lot of changes at USC. So new conference, the Big Ten. we'll get to that. I always open these, though, with coaching changes. USC did make some significant coaching changes on the defensive side of the ball. As you mentioned, they actually did kind of fail to play good enough defense, and Alex Grinch was relieved of his position. They bring in UCLA's defensive coordinator. How do you expect this to look different as a result of the coaching change?
Yeah, I mean, they needed to look significantly different. I mean, they were really bad on defense in 2022, and Lincoln Riley told us the reasons why he wanted to keep Alex Grinch for the continuity and all that kind of stuff. It made sense when he told us that. It was obviously the wrong call. I think Lincoln Riley kind of realized this offseason, and even the end of last season, this wasn't going to cut it. Their offense is always good. They just needed to have some kind of help on the other side of the ball, and they saw what D'Anton Lynn did. For UCLA, they were, I think, in the 90s of most of the statistical categories on defense. He comes in for 1 year, and they're like top 20. And so I feel like they could make some significant strides as far as scheme goes. I think they've made some changes how they practice and, add some guys through the portal. But I think this is more – usually USC has like these kind of flashy off seasons. This was more of like a substance off season, like getting a whole new coaching staff in. Some behind the scenes stuff that might not be as like you're going to talk about it at national previews, but really internally they've made things a lot better. I think that's what they're really hoping for, and we'll see it. But I mean, they can't, I said it last year, they can't be as bad as they were the year before. They were, they just can't be as bad as they were on defense this year. So it seemed like they made some strides in the spring, and we'll see what D'Anton Lynn can be able to do, but they're relying on that a lot. They can win a bunch of games if the defense is just pretty good. And it's been putrid for 2 years. So we'll see what they can do, but they are relying on that, those coaching changes a lot.
You mentioned some changes to practice. I know that's something I've had a lot of coaches kind of who aren't at USC, so they're speculating, but they're like, I wonder, how much do they hit in practice? Do you know what some of those practice changes are, or is it like a mentality thing, or what can you give us there, if anything?
Yeah, so we only get to watch the beginning, and it's funny. It almost seemed strategic that Lincoln Riley would put some tackling drills in those early portions, like right in front of the media pen. Like, hey, look, we're tackling. But for what we've heard, and sometimes you can get some insight from the interviews. I mean, I asked Josh Henson, the offensive line coach, about some of the differences, and he had mentioned that previously, the defensive line were trying to run around them, and now they're trying to run through them. And so we've seen guys look bigger. We've seen, just heard from coaches and players about some of the changes, at least practice behind the scenes. So I think there's optimism there that they have made some changes. But it was great in the back of the day, but we could watch everything. We can't do that now. So you kind of like whatever you can kind of gain from your sources and from talking to these players and coaches. But it seemed like there have been some changes.
Luckily for the Peristyle board, y'all are well sourced. So got to ask you now about Miller Moss. So Caleb Williams, number 1 overall pick, off to the NFL. Guy was a total stud. Bowl game, Miller Moss played like a lot better than I thought he would play. I mean, the last time I had seen him was like mop-up duty against Colorado in 22. And I was like, oh, man, I'm like, he's throwing little screen passes and they're working okay. But I don't know if this is going to actually work if he's the guy. But he looked okay. Maybe better than okay. His numbers were awesome. Is he for sure the guy?
Yeah, what Lincoln Riley said in the spring, like if they had a game tomorrow, like he would be the guy. I don't see like a Jade Mayava coming in. I think he's got some upside, but probably not Big Ten ready yet. And he looked good in the bowl game. We have to discount bowl performances a lot of the times, but I think this was when you saw the guys that weren't playing for USC. So a lot of these younger players were in it. and they're trying to play hard. And I think Louisville's defense is pretty good, and I think they played pretty hard. He threw 6 touchdown passes, and it wasn't like you were saying, like the dump offs. Like 5 of those were into the end zone. Like these were legit touchdown passes. And I think you'll see, Lincoln Riley's made all kinds of different quarterbacks successful, but I think Miller Moss will be more in the the constraints of what the offense are. Like if this play is called, that's what he's going to run. Where Caleb Williams can, be Picasso out there and make something a little bit unique and different. And it's just, he was really good at that. So at least at first, I think you're going to see Miller Moss sort of follow the script, and the script is always really good. And, Caleb Williams didn't have to follow all the time because he's so good. So I think there's a lot of optimism around him. He's definitely won over the locker room. He's very popular. I think no one was more happy on the sidelines when Miller Moss, I think there was 6 touchdowns, then Caleb Williams was jumping on him and stuff. So he's a popular player there, and he has a really good rapport with their 4 really good sophomore wide receivers. So I think it's, that he should be okay, but he should be the guy. And I think there's a lot of optimism in the program that he can, be different than Caleb Williams, but still have a really, really potent offense with him.
All right, you're looking at this roster. Which position rooms would you no doubt take this year's over last year's?
Oh, that's a good one. That's tough. I think the wide receivers are actually going to be better, even though, a guy like Taj Washington, Brendan Rice were good, but just having, I think the combination, Jacoby Lane, I think is going to be an absolute stud. We know what Zachariah Branch can do. He's probably got the most notoriety, but he probably did the least in that Holiday Bowl. The other 3 guys were Mekhi Lemon and former 5-star Deuce Robinson. I think that group, and they added some veterans, in the portal. That core group of 4 sophomores is going to be really good. So I think they're going to be better. And I think the secondary in general, they added some pieces there. There's a ton of depth in the safety room and the cornerback room. I think they're going to be a lot better in those 2 groups.
I also wonder if it's just a little bit more simplified for the safeties, if they can just show more of their athletic skill. Last year, and in watching them, I mean, sometimes I just really wasn't sure what their roles were, or if not really. I mean, if they were playing correctly, I still weren't sure. Like, I don't know what he's supposed to do there.
Yeah, I don't think they knew a lot of times, but that was part of the problem.
yeah, that was that was challenging to say the least. All right, let's go to Indianapolis. I think if you listen to Cover 3, that's not my favorite place to go for Media Day, but that's where the Big Ten Media Days are, and I'm going to be there. I assume you'll be there.
Yeah.
Who is going to get not on the first or second team, all Big Ten team in the preseason, who have a pretty good shot to be there come the postseason version?
So I think one of the guys I mentioned is Jacoby Lane. Of those guys coming in, probably the least heralded of that receiver, class that came in a couple years ago. I feel like he only caught 1 pass in the spring game, and all of us in the press box were kind of feeling that Lincoln Riley didn't want to show too much. I think it was a one-handed catch he had or something, but they just didn't want to reveal how good he's going to potentially be. So I think he's someone that of that group of wide receivers, I think is just going to kind of pop out and emerge as someone that's like, hey, this guy's going to be really good. And I think Elijah Page has an opportunity for that. He played left tackle in the Holiday Bowl and did really well. He's a redshirt freshman, only played a few games last year. So I think he's got the potential to be a mainstay for USC the next couple of years at left tackle. So it'll be interesting to kind of see how he develops, but I don't think he'll be on any of those preseason lists, but by the end of the year, he could be.
You mentioned receiver, you mentioned the safety room. Is there another room where if they have to dip into their depth a little bit, you feel pretty good about it?
It's not as, I think the linebacker depth might be pretty good. They've just been they haven't been very productive there, but they added some guys from the portal, and just having guys like Mason Cobb and Eric Gentry, who, we saw Cobb have a lot of success at Oklahoma State. Eric Gentry is like this kind of a unicorn of a player, 6'6", but really didn't have a position. And I think, Rajon Davis and some of the guys they have, plus players they've added from the portal, Mascarenas Arnold coming in from Oregon State. I think that they have a pretty good rotation there. It's just tough because you think that there's talent in the room. They just haven't showed that production. So you're hoping with the scheme, bringing in Matt Entz from, a national championship winning head coach to be your linebacker coach, hoping that he can kind of get that room together. I feel like there's enough talent there and there's pretty good depth. It's just something you wouldn't look at as like, oh, that's been a really good room, because they just haven't been productive. So I feel like there's some kind of sneaky depth in there, and we'll have to see how that kind of plays out as fall camp comes around.
Speaking of fall camp, which position battles are you going to be really monitoring this fall?
Yeah, I think the offensive line, you have to start there. I mean, Jonah Monheim coming back, moving from left tackle to center is, I think it's really important, and they're going to need him. He's the smartest offensive lineman in the room, but they don't have a lot of other veterans. They have Manuel Pregnon, from Wyoming that came in. Mason Murphy played some guard, played some tackle, and then Gino Quinones, who was out last year with an injury. We'll see, how quickly he's able to come back. But everyone else, like I mentioned before, they're freshmen and redshirt freshmen. There's one sophomore, Lonnie Noah, who got a few starts last year. I think that which of those young guys are going to step up and play? Because I mean, you need more than 6 guys, and that's kind of where they are right now, where you feel pretty good. And after that, there's just a lot of unknown. So how they fill out that 2 deep on the offensive line, I think is going to be really important, because, like I said, if Miller Moss is sort of operating under what the blueprint of what Lincoln Riley's offense is, you really need some solid play up front, so he's not running for his life and trying to improv, and you get the running game going and all of that. So I think how that offensive line shapes out is where I'm going to be watching the most.
The schedule is not particularly friendly in year one of the Big Ten. And LSU, Notre Dame in the non-conference, and they'll beat Utah State, but Utah State still runs a really annoying offensive system that you can't just totally no-show the week of prep. Like otherwise you'll look kind of foolish out there. They do dodge Ohio State and Oregon at the top, which is certainly helpful given how much those teams have been active in the portal this offseason. But they also kind of dodge the teams that you might think are gimmies in large part, with Purdue and Northwestern not appearing on the schedule. Is there a guy on this team that maybe we're not projecting him to reach his full potential this year, but if he can arrive a year early, that would make a big time difference for them?
It's a good question. I think if you look, I mean, like Elijah Newby at the linebacker spot as freshman, I think he's come in and had some a lot of people thinking he can be a big time player. I think there's a few probably on the defensive side that they're probably going to need some of these younger players that have looked good in the spring, and if they look good in the fall, they're going to kind of step up and be bigger time contributors. I think schedule wise, like you're talking about, it is interesting because I was listening to like your Penn State summer school, and it's like, hey, could Penn State be a playoff contender? Sure. Can LSU, can Notre Dame, Michigan, Washington, like all the, those, the 2 teams that are in the national championship game, like you have to say all of those are potential playoff contenders. And I think USC is in, if they get things right, they could potentially be in that, probably a little notch below there, but they have the potential to kind of do make some, win some games and go 10-2, but they also have a lot of potential to go like 7-5 or whatever. And the missing Oregon and Ohio State, I think is big, because if you look at the rosters, those are probably the 2 most talented teams in the Big Ten. They've done the most in the offseason. They're the ones that you're looking at. Washington and Michigan, you're not sure. I mean, they were in the title game, but they lost a lot from last year, and we'll see how they kind of rebuild. And they do miss some of the gimme games. So there's a lot of games that you could, if you don't show up against, Minnesota or Nebraska or something like that, you're probably going to lose those games. And so it's a really interesting schedule. But it's one of those, I feel like, Bud, if USC kind of takes care of their business, they have enough talent on the roster, they get a better defense, they should score a whole bunch of points. I mean, they can win a lot of those games, but a lot of it's sort of like internal, like, hey, if USC is buttoned down and they're doing all the right things, they're not defenders looking at their wristbands, with 2 seconds left on
the ball is snapped.
Like, what's going on? If they're not doing that kind of stuff, then I think it's a really interesting schedule where you could play and beat pretty much anyone on the schedule, but there's a lot of teams that can beat you too. So how much Lincoln Riley kind of gets these guys together, I think is going to determine how far they go.
I was putting together a list, and the YouTube short or Instagram, TikTok, wherever CBS decides to put it, will run long before this episode does, so I can go ahead and kind of spoiler it here. But I think there's only 5 or 6 teams that would have a realistic shot of making the playoff at 9-3 this year. And USC actually, for me, is one of them, because you would have those significant wins in the non-conference. Like if they go 9-3, even if you lose like the 3 hardest, you still have a lot of other really good wins. If those 3 losses aren't, blowout fashion.
Yeah.
Now, it's probably easier to say, yeah, go 9-3 than it actually is to go out and do it. You have to stay really healthy on the lines of scrimmage, adjust to a new conference, adjust to the travel schedule. But I think the opportunity is certainly there for Lincoln Riley and those guys to go out and actually make the playoff if they can pull that off.
Yeah. And I think they have a shot. And I think the logistics of the schedule aren't that difficult either. There's not like back-to-back. If you look at UCLA's schedule, like it's a lot different. That's like we going here, going there. But they have one Friday night game, or I think Oregon has 2. I think Washington has 2, and it's Rutgers in LA. And usually the Pac-12 would put Friday night games in Los Angeles at like 6 p.m. or 5, and you're never going to get there unless you like take off work that day. Just there's no way with traffic. This is an 8 p.m. game. Local time 11 p.m. for Rutgers. So that's not really doing them any
Body
favors.
clock.
Yeah, there's some body clock stuff. And we don't know. Maybe they're going to have to do a big noon game and travel east for that. But that kind of stuff too isn't that difficult. So I think a lot of it is sort of like, this is in your control, USC. If you can be the team that, there's a lot of potential there. If you can kind of live up to it, there's not these obstacles that are just overwhelming. Playing Ohio State in the horseshoe, like they did that 2009 and got a win, but that'd probably be pretty tough to do this year, or even going into Eugene this year and playing Oregon. But I think it's more reasonable to try to beat Washington or Michigan on the road than those 2 teams. So there's a lot of things that set up pretty positively for them. But of course, you go out and lose to some of these teams that you shouldn't lose to, then it's just going to be kind of like what are you going to do now? But there is a lot of potential there if you're looking at it from an optimistic viewpoint. It's not super rosy, rose-colored glasses kind of thing.
No doubt about it. Well, whatever happens, we know the Peristyle will be very, very active. And we'll be checking out USC football and all your coverage this fall. Ryan, I really appreciate it.
All right. Thanks for having me on, bud.
All right. Take care, bud.